Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Makes You Click with me, Daniel Mills. And I'm really pleased today to have as my guest Kersti Seksel, somebody I've realized I've known for 25 years. I know neither of us look old enough to have known each other for that long, but I think it was 97 when we first met. Kersti is quite unique in the field of veterinary behavior because she's certified on 3 different continents. I don't think anybody else meets that requirement. So she's an American diplomat, European diplomat, and also a fellow of the Australian equivalent, whatever it is. I don't know exactly, but she has, as well as her veterinary degree, she has a BA in behavioral sciences. She did a master's course. We'll probably talk about a little bit about her research that she did there, which is on the puppy classes. And some of you may be familiar with the study, but I think it's always worth chatting about that particular study and how it's often misunderstood. She's also an adjunct senior lecturer at Charles Sturt University.
Oh, no.
Oh, not anymore.
No, I'm an adjunct professor at Charles Sturt, associate professor at Charles Sturt, and an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland.
Okay.
So
are you still an associate at Sydney or not?
I'm now I've gone back to lecture there as of week after next. So I don't know if I've got a title there yet.
Okay. So anyway, she gets around Australia, which is a big place, and as well as running her veterinary behavior practice as well. She's also a pioneer of kitten kindy, which was it's sort of the cat equivalent of puppy socialization classes. And as I said, I think we first met at the first veterinary behavior meeting in 1997. And she's presented some fascinating papers over the years at some of the conferences. Remember one on moving house. And that's the first piece of work that I saw the effect of stress on moving house. And she shares her home with her little whippity dog, Tina, as well as Norm, her husband. So welcome, Kersti. Lovely to see you. It's been too long with the pandemic, etc. Really not had a chance to catch up because we usually catch up every 2 years at least at the IVBMs, don't we?
We do. But I think the whole world is upside down for lots of people with COVID, and now with all the activity, I guess the word to put it, in Europe at the moment. It's all a bit daunting to even walk out of your house.
Yes, of course, because and especially with your roots in Estonia as well, it's particularly worrying, I think, for a lot of the Baltic states. But let's talk behaviour and more positive things. I mentioned in the introduction, as I said, one of the papers I remember you presenting was on moving house, which I just thought was just such a neat thing. As you know, they say getting married, getting divorced, moving house are the 3 most stressful things in life. And nobody seemed to have ever looked at it in relation to cats and dogs. And then you sort of turned up with this lovely survey, and it did seem to indicate that the animals were getting stressed out too. I'm just wondering where that idea came from. Were you moving house and thinking, my dog's a nightmare?
No, we just a few colleagues and I we're talking about it, and one of the many, I guess, companies that I consult to, we were just chatting about it because I guess the person there was moving house, and there was a human psychologist involved in that study as well, and they looked at the human side of things and I looked at the animal side of things, and it is stressful. I agree. I think it's stressful for animals. I think it is stressful for people. Well, I know it's stressful for people, but interestingly, since then, I have been collecting data on that, and if I ever have 3 seconds to look at it, because it's one of the questions when my clients come to see me, they fill in a 25-page questionnaire, and one of them is have you moved house, Reese? Have you moved house? How often have you moved house? And how did it affect your dog or cat? And it's interesting their perceptions of it, because obviously I can't ask the dog and cat themselves, but people sometimes perceive that the animal has no problem at all, and others perceive that moving to one location was more stressful than another. It's often they put it down to, and again, that's the only way you can. They think sometimes it's because they've moved to a bigger place that the cat or the dog feels more comfortable if they've got an outside area. But some of them, somebody I just saw a few weeks ago said that since they've moved into a smaller unit, their animals appeared happier. And if we think about it, I guess this is why I need time to research it and put it together into some sort of paper again. Perhaps these animals who are anxious when they're in more confined circumstances actually feel better because the choices are taken away. And I think sometimes with animals, they do get stressed if we have too many choices for them. So watch this space, Danny, watch this space.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Yeah, sometimes we do have far too many choices, and yeah, having that little bit of structure imposed on us can make life an awful lot easier in all sorts of ways as well. And then the other thing is, and I think when I first met you, was sort of, hang on, this person runs Kitten Kindy. This, people were just starting to get used to the idea of puppy classes. I mean, where did the idea of Kitten Kindy come from? And I mean, how successful has it been? Because Australia has a mixed relationship with cats, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think the world has a mixed relationship with cats. Really, I guess when I first introduced puppy preschool to Australia, I remember the very first presentation I gave, and it was to vets, and they all looked at me like, I'm crazy. Why do I want vets to be involved in teaching puppies manners? Because I've never really thought we needed to teach them obedience. I think for me, it was always about initially teaching them manners and teaching them how to get on with other animals of their own species. And then having sort of promoted that to vets, and then my vet nurse at the time was talking at vet nurse conferences talking about that, it sort of took off. And I suddenly realized that I had no data to back this up at all. I was telling everybody what a great idea it was, and I really didn't know, hence my foray back to university again when I swore I'd never darken the doorstep of another university after I got my vet degree. So that's why I went and did my master's honours thesis looking at the benefits and not of puppy classes run in veterinary hospitals. And I guess when we got the data from that, people kept saying to me, if you do this for dogs, why don't you do it for cats? And it was really my clients said, well, you're doing this great stuff for the dogs. What about the cats? And I thought, well, why not? Let's do it for cats. Let's see what's going on with that. So that's where it all came from. Was literally my clients were the ones who said, why don't we do that? You're being speciesist, I suppose. but that's really where it came from. So, and how successful has it been? It depends where. A lot of the shelters here run them because I think for them, when we don't have an overabundance of cats anymore. We used to, but COVID has sort of solved that problem. It's pretty hard to get a pet at all in Australia, unless you're willing to pay a lot of money. But when there was an overabundance, and there still is in some places, so that's a very broad generalisation, but when there was an overabundance of kittens, if you had a kitten that would, come, sit, give me 5, give me 10, do a few tricks, people thought they were really cute. So they were a lot easier to rehome if they came with some basic manners, I guess, and a bit of cuteness to go with what they went. And now I think, there are certainly feline practices that run them. But again, it's more about, and this is where I really think these classes should be, it's about helping owners understand neurotypical behaviour in the species that they live with, because I do think there's this, but I'm telling you something you already know, but how much misinformation there is and how much expectations we have on these animals. And it's just not fair. It's not fair what we want them to do or not do. Like I don't want my dog to bark. Interesting. Yeah. Don't want my cat to hunt. Interesting. So
yeah, no, I know what you mean. And yeah, I want my 2 cats to love each other as much as I love both of them. That's the yeah.
And I really want a 3rd cat because these 2 are a bit aloof and I really want that cuddly cat. So I'm going to bring a 3rd. Well, maybe I'll have a 4th cat as well, and we'll put them all in the house together and see what happens.
Yes. Take a deep breath at that point. So you mentioned the work that you did for your master's, which I thought was a fascinating study, because again, a lot of the work in our field ends up being survey based one way or the other. But you looked at this issue of what difference do actually the puppy classes make. And if people haven't read the paper, and I'll try and remember to put the link in at the end of this, do you want to give it just a little potted summary of the main findings? Because again, I've heard people misunderstand this and misrepresent the findings that you had. But it was a nice study because you basically brought in different groups and gave them different things to do, and then you looked to see what the outcomes were.
Yeah, and I like anybody, you think this will be a really easy project, and by the time you've watched about 110,000 what felt like puppy videos, I remember sitting down one night and thinking, oh, if I never see another puppy again, it'll be enough. But basically what we did, we actually brought the puppies in, we exposed them, we had a control group that we did nothing for really. They just came in, spent the same amount of time with us in a room as the puppies that went to puppy classes. And in puppy classes, we looked at the effect of, we tried to tease out the effect of training them, socializing them, exposing them to others, and if this really made a difference to them. And I know initially when we analysed the data, people said, well, you haven't found anything. I said, well, actually, we've found a lot. And just because you don't get those great, I guess, positives and negatives that people in research always want, I said, well, actually, I think this is really important stuff, because I've always thought very strongly that we don't publish the data that people think isn't important, and because it doesn't show anything. Well, not showing anything is just as important as showing something. But the end result was, surprise, surprise, guess what? If you did a bit of training with your dog, it was able to obey what you asked it to do. So if you taught it to sit, it knew how to sit. If you didn't teach it to sit, well, it might have learned it anyway, but it obviously the group that were shown how to do everything knew how to do everything. So if you go to school, you learn your alphabet and you learn how to add 2 and 2 together. But if you don't go to school, you can learn it, but it's a lot harder. So pretty simple finding, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, but it's also the socialization side of things, and the fact that between the group that had the specific socialization exercises, and as you say, it's not that there's no effect, it's just that it was not different to the other group, and the important thing is, those classes are there to help owners to understand how to train their animals in their home, as opposed to the classes are going to sort it all for them. And I think that's one of the really sort of neat and important elements of that, is that we can leave it to chance and it might happen, but our job is to try and guide it in the right direction, to teach them the manners or well-behavedness, and to set them up accordingly. I agree. And for me, I probably didn't think about this as much. It's the wonder of time, isn't it, when you look back on things and you think, I probably didn't express this quite the right way. But for me, it wasn't ever really about teaching the dogs to do things. It was always about helping owners understand what dogs do. And I'm not sure that many years ago that I understood why dogs do what they do as well as I do now. And hopefully in years to come, I'll even understand dogs more and more. But it was never meant as like a training class for dogs to be able to be obedient. It was really for people to understand dogs and their development and how important socialization is, that they did learn to accept others. And for me, in retrospect, I think people still don't understand what really socialization is. It's not about play. It's not about going to a class and having a good time with all the other puppies and getting pounded into a heap if somebody doesn't watch the class properly. It's about recognizing that others exist. There are other dogs who are bigger. There's other dogs that are smaller. There's children. There's adults. They come in different shapes and sizes and ages, and with different disabilities, but they're all okay. They're all allowed to exist out there. And that's really what I think the classes should be. But they've taken on a life of their own, and all sorts of interesting things are happening, which not always wasn't my intention. And really, I don't think they're always beneficial these days, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we did, and we never published in a journal, but we did looked at first of all, the qualifications of people running puppy parties and puppy classes, and what they're actually teaching and what they were actually doing with these various things. And we also gave them some tests of their knowledge of understanding some of the principles of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, etc. And yeah, as we expected, people running puppy parties generally had less qualifications and less understanding actually of the learning principles. And they were largely focusing on, they said the main aim was to habituate the animals to the vet clinics and things like that. But yeah, they were just letting the puppies play. And funny, because we're chatting at work at the moment about this, is what constitutes a good greeting between two dogs? And there seem to be, I hear more and more people say, oh, well, they're just playing. Well, if your dog completely bowls over my dog, it might be playing, but that's still not a good greeting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I had a client in fact, yesterday, and she said, I don't think my dog knows how to communicate with other dogs. And she said, I think it's playing, but other times it's definitely not playing. It interacts with these other dogs, but I said, well, we talked about what play should constitute. She said, no, my dog does never, ever, ever has done a play bow with me or any other dog. And if it wants to interact with another dog, it nose pokes them. And I said, well, that's that. If the other dog understands a nose poke for what this dog is saying, it's all well and good. But if that other dog doesn't understand a nose poke is, okay, we want to play, then that's when things go wrong. And she said, yep, that's absolutely right. That's exactly what happened. So it's that communication, and we spent a lot of time talking about communication, but I can say something, but is my message understood by you? And I think I'm very clear. Danny Mills nods his head and says, yeah, I understand everything she's saying. But if you're thinking about something else, or you're distracted, or you don't agree with me, the odds are you don't actually get the same message as I intend. And I think communication is one of the big things in behavioral medicine. In veterinary medicine, we're communicating with our clients, but what we're looking at with behavior is watching if the dogs can communicate with each other. And can a dog understand when one dog says, no, I don't want to say hello to you. I have no intention of saying hello to you, going back to your point of greeting. If the other dog goes, well, I don't want to talk to you either, well, that's okay. We've agreed to not communicate, not greet each other. But you're right, being bowled over it's not the greeting that you really want some stranger. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk down the street and some stranger coming along and just rushing into me and bowling me over or hugging me or whatever. Like, why do we expect dogs to do that? I just find that bizarre.
It seems to be something that, we're seeing more of as well, though. Like this expectation that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Is this something that has come about, you think, perhaps because of people with the puppy parties and whatever, and they're just thinking in terms of play, and that's what the animals should be doing? Because I don't recall seeing this 15 years ago. It's such a big issue.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I mean, that was one of the reasons I changed when people were talking about puppy parties. Ian Dunbar was talking about them in the States, and he said, oh, I have all the clients come over and I give them wine and cheese and we let the puppies play. And that's how they get used to the vet hospital. And that's when I thought, well, no, actually, I don't want it to be a party. I don't want to have wine and cheese and the clients that's a good social event for the clients. And maybe if you get a group of dogs that get on, that's great. But that's why I renamed it and actually sort of registered the trademark many years ago as Puppy Preschool, because I wanted it to be a learning experience, and hence kindergarten, for the fact that I wanted it to be, you go there to learn something, not to have a party. And I do notice there was a few papers out, I think from the UK, looking at puppy parties. And I thought, well, see, there, in just what you said, lies the problem. As soon as you're going to a party, you have a totally different expectation of what you're going to get there. And if you go to a puppy party and your puppies don't get to play, then you automatically, as an owner, I think, because people say, well, my dog wasn't even allowed off the lead, and they weren't allowed to play, or they only played with one other puppy. And I try to explain to them that that's probably appropriate, because if the other puppies don't know how to interact and don't know how to greet each other, and I think Danny, you're absolutely right. It's that if you don't start off with a good greeting with people, then you're off on the wrong foot. And same happens with dogs. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
If you get bowled over, you're going to look very differently at those dogs to the ones that come over and check you out, and you get a chance to check them out and sniff you and do a bit of a play bow. But yeah, for me, the nomenclature puppy party does not sit well and never has. Hence, I don't use that terminology because I don't think it conveys what my intent was to even habituate the dog or socialize the dog or help the dog learn some manners. You don't necessarily do that at a party.
And I mean, the other thing that happened certainly in the UK is when this started to take off, it was very much being promoted as a great way of, vet nurses to do this in the clinic, a great way to cut your teeth in animal training. And I'm thinking the puppies and the kittens are the last ones you should be training, because, make a mistake and you change their life course. It's not just about that initial greeting and how that set things up, but the animal's got so much less experience to fall back on.
I totally agree with you. And part of that, I think, when I first started this, is that I did think, oh, well, it is going to be just fun. We'll just play with these puppies. Well, yes. And then as I did the thesis and I looked into it, I thought, no, we don't really want the least experienced to deal with the animals. We want the most experienced people to be dealing with the young ones. You don't want someone who knows nothing to be dealing with your young child, your young puppy, your young kitten. And one of the things that I really firmly believe, and I've always firmly believed, that vets should be part of this. It shouldn't just be the nurses or, the young nurses just starting off. You need a vet there, because a lot of these puppies do have some sort of issues that vets should be able to recognise, in the sense of their behaviour is not neurotypical. They are, yes, they can be boisterous, but some of these dogs, sometimes have other issues, medical issues, and pain being one of them. I just had another resident and a student, and I sent them off to look at some puppy classes while they were with me. And, what I quote, and, is stuff that we certainly have seen papers that say 1 in 5 dogs have an anxiety disorder, just like 1 in 5 people have. And in puppy classes, and Martin Godbo's paper sort of showed that at a very early age, you can tell the dogs that are different. And if you go to a puppy class and they came back and said, gee, we found the 1 in 5, And they said there was only 4 puppies in the class, but one of them was so different from the other puppies in the way it interacted and wanted to do things. And the woman was quite distraught that her puppy couldn't do what the other puppies were doing. And I said, did the trainer actually say, because this was run by a trainer, not by a nurse or a vet, that, your puppy is perhaps needing a bit of help? And they said no. And I said, well, that's not unusual, because people aren't often ready to hear that their puppy is not typical. But this is the beauty of puppy preschool that I've been promoting for years, that if you have a class of 5 or 6 puppies, the odds are one of them is going to have some sort of issue. And if you're there, they can see it for themselves. I think it's really hard if you only have one dog to compare that to other dogs in the park. But if you're sitting in a class for 4 weeks or 5 weeks and your dog is behaving totally differently from the others, you can see it with your own eyes there's a problem. So if you've got a vet in the class, then the vet can say, well, we know anxiety is a medical problem and maybe we need to help this puppy and help that owner through that period, rather than them finishing the classes and being distraught because their dog is not the same.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and it's just and the veterinary profession does need to much broadly embrace this whole topic, and as I said, we're up to 90% now of the referral cases we're seeing in the adult animals. There's some medical problem that needs some attention in some form.
Yeah,
and I don't know how much of it is that we're getting better at looking for it, and I think there is an element of that has increased that. But I also think that, well, I can't help but think that the increased inbreeding and issues related to that as well, and that it is more prevalent than it was 25, 30 years ago. I don't know I don't know how closed is the gene pool in Australia with dogs and cats?
It's I don't know that I can answer that, but we don't generally get a lot of massive imports of overseas animals. We're seeing it more now. People, I think I've seen more animals that have come from overseas in the last year, when people have been moving back to Australia, having been living overseas, and they're bringing the dogs that have been rescued. I saw one the other day that had come from Turkey, lived in Spain, was in Switzerland for a while, but there's those rescue dogs that I see, or I hear from my colleagues overseas, and certainly my residents, that they see dogs that have been rescued in this country or that've come from Syria. We don't normally get them. So our pool is different. And it's something I'd love to delve into, but one of the things that I think we see in Australia is that sometimes the medications that are prescribed don't work the same way here as they work elsewhere, because I think our gene pool is different. So when I see published papers on the use of a particular medication in dogs and it doesn't work in my hands, I think you may have been where I presented a paper on Herpesine A, and I said, look, I tried it because it was coming out of America, and they said it was a really magic is the wrong word, but it works really well and it really helps these animals. Well, every single one of my patients got worse, and notably worse. So, I thought, well, maybe I'm just using it on the wrong cases. I'm not picking the cases that they're picking. But I actually think, having looked at this, well, that's the beauty, isn't it, of having done something over several decades, that you go, actually, I think it is because we have a different gene pool here. We know one of my colleagues many years ago did her PhD looking at feline AIDS virus, and the staging of it in cats in Australia is not the same way it stages in the UK. They just genetically do not get AIDS in Australia the way that the UK cats did. And that paper was done probably 25 years ago. And I remember thinking at the time, well, if that disease doesn't stage the same way because of our island population, maybe there's other things here we don't stage the same way. And to go back to your genetic, and I don't know, I mean, this is what I've been thinking for years and years, but I know that sometimes when someone comes out, oh, this is the best new medication to treat yada, it doesn't work in my patients. And I figure after 20 years, I can't be that bad at diagnosing things. I'm not perfect by any chance, but if their description and my description is the same of the signs that the animal is presenting, why doesn't it work in my population and it works in your population? So
no, and well, and I know you've presented several papers actually of comparative caseloads involving other clinics around the world as well. So, and I think that's, as you say, a really unexplored area, and it's so easy to think, that what applies in one country applies in another, etc. I've noticed over recent years there's been quite a few papers coming out from a group in Iran as well, which is just not a country that you would think of. And actually, I've got an Iranian student on our master's program as well. And the whole attitude towards dogs is very different in Iran to many other places as well. And we really do need to be exploring these cultural elements as well. I think to just try and tease out some of those effects. Was it you that told me the story of the novel protein diet that was released in Australia?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. We keep names out of it, but I just thought that was
the novel protein they introduced was kangaroo meat, and you kind of had to look at it from that, umbrella view and go, well, kangaroo is not a novel protein for our pets in Australia. It's sold in all the pet shops, and they just couldn't understand that this was not going to be a bestseller here because it isn't a novel protein for most of our pets. So again, that I think that illustrates how sometimes you can do very good work, but because you haven't thought the big picture, and the big picture is yeah, maybe we do have a different population that are exposed to different things. And culturally, I mean, like you, I've been lucky enough to teach in Thailand and Asia. In general, I guess I've been to China and Taipei and all sorts of places, but and in Europe. But people, what we do, even in America, when I was living in America, the things that they think are the way you handle animals is not what Australians do. And neither one is right, neither one is wrong. It's just different. And so you know, I found that things that I would automatically tell people to do in Australia, because culturally it would be socially acceptable, just wouldn't be there, and vice versa. Some of the things that I see and read from papers from elsewhere, I think, boy, I don't think I could get my clients to do that. I don't think they would buy into that because culturally we're different.
Can you give any specific examples on that one, just out of interest?
Well, one of the Asian countries don't believe that it's correct to have dogs on a lead when they go out. In Australia, I'm not going to name names, but in Australia, by law, we have to have our dog under effective control, and it has to be on a lead. Not to say that all Australians put their dog on a lead when they go out, because I think there's this idea that, oh, look how well behaved my dog is. It can just chat next to me on the street. I don't need to have it on lead. But yeah, so that's sort of an interesting thing. And I do remember the first time I was teaching in China, one of the questions the students asked was, how do you wash a dog? And I thought they were being like, what do you mean? And then I realized I had never been into a home of a Chinese person. Like, I don't know what their homes look like. So I was not aware of, and this is me being ignorant of, you know, I mean, how do you do it? Like, do you have a laundry sink, or do you have a shower or whatever? Because it's different. It is different. And I was fascinated by some of the places that had little toilets for dogs in the bathroom, the little sinkholes that, you know, like there's toilets for people. There's little squat toilets for dogs. I thought, wow, that's really amazing. I don't think I could get our dogs to squat over a hole in the bathroom, but there you go. So there's lots of interesting things you learn if you don't keep your mind shut and you just realize that it's a different way of doing things. Do you think your dog, you know, squat over a little hole in the bathroom?
Well, I think you'd have problems with walking over the porcelain and standing still. You know?
These are doggy ones. These are not people ones. They're
but yeah, no. As I said, it's understanding how things are set up as well. And yeah, you started off your career actually in the UK as a vet, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I worked in Australia for a bit, and then, like all Aussies, as soon as you graduate, you head off overseas and you go to the UK, because obviously we could work there pretty easily. And that, again, was a cultural shock for me, you know, because you Brits live differently from us in Australia. And I found, like, the housing is different and everything was different. And I also found it fascinating, and I've told this story a lot, so nobody be offended, but going to see some of your because you do have a very different hierarchy of social etiquette. And I remember going to see someone's dog, and they told me I had to go to the tradesman's entrance. And I stood at the front door and I said, I'm an Australian vet. If you want me to see your dog, I'm coming in the front door where all the other people come. And I think they were so shocked that they just let me in. And from then on in, I came in the front door. And everybody said, you know, when I went back to practice, oh, no, you can't do that. You go around the tradesman's entrance. I said, well, I'm not a tradesman. And that's it, not going to do it. And so many times when I did large animal work in the UK, I think they only called me out because they wanted to listen to my accent. And they'd say, wow, well, you're not from here, are you? I said, no. Oh, you're from south of London, yeah? I'm way south of London, thank you very much. But culturally there was, you know, and you think between the UK and Australia, there wouldn't be that much different. But there is. So not surprising that our animals might be different too.
So, this one question I've never asked you, but I ask most of the people on when I do these chats anyway, is how you got into behavior in the first place, and what part fortune plays in it as well in your success. Because I'm a great believer that yes, you can work hard, but actually, to be successful, you also need good luck, and it often starts with where you happen to be born, and that's the biggest bit of luck that most of us have, I think, to be honest. But I mean, were you always interested?
No, and it's a question I've answered in a few kind of forums, but it's sort of like I got into vet. Most people I know who did vet science really wanted to be vets. I had no intention of being a vet, zero intention of being a vet. I never grew up wanting to be a vet. I didn't think it's not that I didn't grow up with animals, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And when I finished high school, as we call it in Australia, I sat the exams, and I think in retrospect, the teachers used reverse psychology on me because, you could pick at what level you were going to sit the exams. And I guess I probably didn't study that hard. And they basically, one of them sat down and said, "You're too stupid to do the exams. You won't even finish high school." And of course, that's like, "Ooh, you think I'm going to show you." And lo and behold, I did show them, and I got a very high mark, and which meant that I could get into doing anything I wanted. And in the old days in Australia, it was when you got your results, you kind of went through the list of all the options of, all the things that you could do. And I always thought I'd go to university, but I never really thought what. So I started the list and go through arts and then da-da-da-da. Well, anyway, I was coming to the bottom of the list, and there was V, veterinary science, and Z, zoology. And my mother said to me, "Oh, I think you should be a pharmacist." And I thought, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And I do remember at school, one of the locum teachers, high school teacher, who'd come in and said, "Oh, I think being a vet would be a good idea. You make a lot of money as a vet." And well, how wrong was he?
Sure, they didn't know anything about it. Yeah.
Know anything about it. But I thought, oh, vet, yeah, why not? I thought he was kind of cool. So I ticked the box. And I have to say, from the minute I walked into vet school, I loved it. I just loved it. I knew by luck, there you go. There's the luck of the whole thing. That by luck, my teachers told me I was too stupid to do anything, and I proved them wrong. And then I got into university, and I loved vet school. I thought it was great. But where behaviour came was really when I was working in the UK. So I did probably after I did vet, I was a vet nurse for a while I was at vet school. And then I went to the UK and started doing locums in London and all over the place. And I couldn't go further north than Manchester because that was my Plimsoll line of where I could understand the Brits and they could understand me. If we went further north, we needed a translator, It was just impossible. It just couldn't work. But London was all okay, and I stuck mainly to London and Brighton and Bournemouth, and they were lovely, lovely times. But while I was working in London, I don't know, I think I might have met Roger Mugford there at that time. He was working in one of the practices that I was locuming in. And I remember walking past him and like listening into his consultations. And I thought, wow, I never knew any of this stuff. How can I have graduated from vet school and not know a bit about behaviour at all? And then I read a paper that said more animals were euthanized every year because of behaviour problems than all the medical conditions and stuff combined. And I remember thinking, really, like, how can I have spent 5 years studying to help animals and 90% of them I can't, because what we do is we give them the green dream, we euthanize them. And why should we? Because, and at that stage, I don't think anybody called them mental health issues or understood any of that stuff in the way that we do now. But I remember thinking that's just appalling, absolutely appalling that I don't know anything about this at all. And when I looked into trying to find out more, there was no Professor Mills, there was nobody else really working in the field. And most of the people were human psychologists. So having sworn never to go back to a university again, I went back to university and did my degree with a major in psychology and behavioural sciences. And that is really where I thought, wow, we really do need to teach psychology. We need to do all that understanding in vet schools. And I don't think we do enough in Australia. I can't speak for most other universities, but it just struck me that we really needed to understand that more. And I guess it was chance meeting with Roger Mugford in the UK and me deciding that I really needed to know more. And having said I don't want to study anymore, I seem to have acquired an alphabet soup behind my name at the moment.
Yeah. So when did you develop this passion for sitting exams? Because you seem to be a sucker for it.
Yeah, well, lucky I don't put all my qualifications behind my name. The printer at one stage said, no, there's not enough room on your card. So I just took a lot of them off. I don't know it's a passion for sitting exams, Danny. I think it's a passion for knowing. I think I want to know things, and I want to know why. Why is this so? But, Professor Sumner Miller, why is this so? And curiosity, I think. And for me, it was like, if I don't know this, how can I help my patients? And how can I put my shingle up and say I'm a veterinarian when I don't really understand how their mind works? And I don't know what's well, we used to call it normal, politically incorrect now, neurotypical now. But yeah, I didn't know. Nobody, I don't know about you, but at vet school, did they teach you about how you toilet train a puppy?
So we had one afternoon with Roger Mugford at Bristol. And that's when I thought, and I saw practice with Roger that Christmas. I stayed with a friend at vet school who happened to live in the same town. And Roger said to me, I think you'd be really good at this. And if you want to, if you want to take it seriously, the only place to go is the States. And in those days, you're allowed to do an elective. And I was told that if I did 6 weeks in the States, they'd take it as doing behavior work. They'd take it as 2 weeks of my elective because it was behavior. So it wasn't really. So I was very lucky that they let me do 6 weeks in the States because they would translate that into 2 weeks. And I was lucky to get those 2 weeks. And that's where I met Kathy and Ben and Lynette and loads of other people as well, and we've remained in touch ever since. And it was a great opportunity because I just went from one to the other, and seeing the way that different people practiced as well was a fantastic education as well. And I didn't hang around too long with anybody, to be honest, and but it was the variety and seeing those things and the opportunities and I think likewise just thinking I had all those hours and hours of poultry and pigs husbandry, and we had one afternoon of cat and dog husbandry. And I started off my career working for the PDSA, who did free veterinary care, and I just thought education is really important here, and if people just understood some of the basic principles, and they're not that difficult, but nobody's ever told them. You just take the animal in, and I think the sort of traditional way where people spent all day with their dog, and their dogs learned to fit in because they were with them the whole time. But actually, our lives are no longer like that, and so people do need guidance as to what to expect. And the dogs need help, and the cats need help when they're not around, what they're supposed to be doing in those situations. So.
Yeah, so we both have Roger Mugford to blame or thank.
Yeah.
Really the word I did blame jokingly because I do think it's one of those, it's luck, happenstance. I just happened to be there when he was giving, seeing cases. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really interesting. And like you, I spent time with Kathy at Cornell because when she came out to Australia, I said, I wouldn't mind seeing what you do. And she said, come on over. And so off I went to the States. Yeah. And the Americans were really open and helpful, and same with Karen. And I think it was just the right place at the right time, like you said, how do you get to where you are? Because, well, there was nobody else really much doing it. If you think about the number of people when you and I started around the world, well, there was only, maybe 20 people, and then now it's grown and it's grown and it's grown, which is fabulous. Absolutely. It is an interesting way how you get to where you are, really. And would you have plotted this course? Well, I couldn't have plotted this course because behavioral medicine didn't exist when I was at university. So how can you plot a course for something that doesn't happen? It's just, I was going to go into computer science. You'll love this, Danny. And I got a scholarship to do computers, and someone said, you don't want to do that. Computers won't last. Absolutely.
So one of the big debates going on at the moment in the UK is the regulation of the behavior profession. And I don't know exactly how it works in Australia, but in the UK, we have the Veterinary Surgeons Act, which protects, being a vet, and only a vet's allowed to do certain things. And at present, it says that if you're treating behavior problems without medication, or if you treat no, what it actually says is if you treat a behavior problem with medication, that is an act of veterinary medicine or surgery. So therefore, it's the realm of a vet. It doesn't actually say not using a drug is as well. And the Royal College is consulting on this at the moment, and there's lots of sort of paraprofessionals, with the physiotherapists, equine dentists, etc., and what body should be involved in sort of regulating the behavior side. And I think when I first started off, I was very passionate about the importance of vets doing this, to the point that I know that and I've never been exclusive, because I just didn't think that vets had skills. So, vets needed to be working as part of a team with non-veterinarians. But increasingly, my personal view, and I'd be interested in your thought and how things work in Australia, is that, the decision not to use medication is as much a veterinary decision as the decision to use medication. And so in the same way as, if you referred a case for physiotherapy to a veterinary physiotherapist who may not be a vet, the vets have got to maintain oversight over the cases. And that doesn't mean that the behavior work should only be done in a vet clinic. But, if things are not working out as, if things are not responding as you would think, then that's a good reason to do another medical exam. Because again, when I started this off, people would say, oh well, rule out all the medical differentials before you refer to a non-vet. That was just junk advice, because there's no way, you can't rule out all medical things. We know that. You do an MRI scan, you're going to find something abnormal if you do enough bits of the body. Is it clinically significant? I don't know. And I think this is one of the problems that's happened in the US, haven't they, with people having private body scans. They're finding all sorts of abnormalities on them, but they think, well, they're asymptomatic, so it's probably not important. But if they were showing signs, then we'd say that was important. And I just think that we're in danger of, animals suffering, because it's not that the vets need to be doing it all, but they need to be engaged and have the oversight to protect the welfare. I mean, what's the score in Australia at the moment?
It depends on which jurisdiction, which state you're in.
Okay.
And it's complex. And I think from my perspective, it's, if you're a vet, you have a license to practice veterinary medicine. But if you're not a vet, you can do all the same stuff except prescribe medication, but you don't have to have any knowledge to do that. And what I see a lot of is these, a lot of them are well-meaning, and some of them really do know a lot, but some of them don't. And they will say things like, oh, you don't want to put your animal on drugs. If you go to a vet that prescribes medication, no, you want to go and see someone else. Or you get people saying, well, go and ask your vet, your dog needs to be on Prozac. Go and get your vet to prescribe Prozac. And because the vets don't know enough, they prescribe based on somebody else's advice, and somebody else is not trained in that. And I agree with you. I think we do see a lot of animals that suffer because they don't see the right person at the right time. They often delay coming to see someone because, well, it's a puppy, it'll grow out of it. You just have to give it love, it'll be fine. And by the time you see this dog at 6 or 7 months of age, it's kind of like, right, this, and then by the time I talk to them, they go, oh, well, they did suggest that I come and see you, when the puppy was 8 weeks old, but I just thought, it wouldn't need you. And now I guess I should have come 2 years ago. Guess you should have. But it's a tough thing, because, this is the nice thing, and I say it all the time. I've been doing this since last millennium, and that makes me wise, not old. It makes me wise because I've seen all this, and you have been doing it since last millennium too. So us two wise heads can look back and say, we can see what we could have done better, should have done better, but we didn't know enough about it. And when I first started doing this, medication was always seen as the last resort. You know, you try everything else, you rule out this, and then you put it, you know, put them on medication. And I remember kind of having this light bulb moment that occasionally happens in all our lives. And I remember thinking, I'm a trained veterinarian. So I wait for the leg to go gangrenous before I give them antibiotics. I wait for the dog to be in ketoacidosis before I give it insulin. Why on earth am I waiting to see how much damage we can do to this animal's brain before I prescribe medication? And once I had that light bulb moment, I thought, no, medication is actually useful, used correctly, used judiciously. And when I see, and I know you're frozen again, so you'll have to listen to this later, but when I hear people going to see a layperson telling them that, no, they must take the dog off medication, whatever I prescribe, I think, well, would they say your dog's got diabetes, you better stop the insulin, or your dog's having seizures, you better stop the anti-seizure medication? And they don't. And I don't know why there is this stigma, I think, about psychotropic medications. There's a stigma about mental health, and it is affecting the quality of life of our patients. That's the bottom line. We should be there for their physical and mental health and their welfare. And yeah, I think there's a lot of dogs and cats and horses and cattle, you know, that do suffer. And I'm not talking about the cattle, well, even the cattle we eat, I suppose. But, you know, horse world is another world that I don't want to explore today because that's a whole minefield, as you know, yourself. But it's like, well, no, they don't have these problems. Well, actually, if they're living creatures with feelings and emotions and a brain that has 2 neurons that occasionally synapse, of course they're going to have problems. And it's our inability to understand that, and the way I think humans still think that they dominate the world. And, you know, I don't know. It's a quandary, an interesting question, Danny.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I say to the students quite a lot now. And like my opinion of medication and when to use it. Yeah, you say 20 years ago, people were, drugs the last resort. And you just think, no, if an animal needs medication, it needs medication. And, you know, it's not a replacement. It's there to supplement what we're actually doing in a lot of these situations. And when people say, oh, well, you know, do the supplements, it can't do any harm. Well, if we've got drugs that actually we know will, you know, are indicated for this condition, and that there's an 80% chance they're going to improve it, delaying treatment actually does do harm. And it doesn't just sort of make the condition worse for the animal. It actually means the animal is suffering for longer. And, you know, and so it's not cost free from that point of view. And yeah, I think sort of some of the time I've spent in the States speaking to friends there, seeing some of the animals there, and we were talking earlier, you know, about you know, cultural differences. Emily Levine, you know, she showed me this video of sort of some of the dogs from Manhattan that she sees, and these dogs are just, you can't do anything with them. They're just such a nervous wreck. And seeing those videos made me realize, okay, you've got a very different sort of case to the ones that I have in rural Lincolnshire here. You know, we very rarely see that. This is not uncommon. And having sort of taken a holiday in New York for a couple of weeks, I can easily understand how those animals end up like that. It just doesn't let up, and it's just in your face the whole time. So, you know, and again, it's that sort of, well, superficially similar. We might make the same diagnosis, but everything else that's going on in the animal's life, culturally and experientially, if you live in New York, is so completely different. And so you can't just take that prescription and whack it across and say, this is going to work. And I think it's a potentially fascinating area that hasn't been touched, is differences in protocols and how they're adapted and why we adapt them from one place to the other. And it's not just that, well, you're in Australia and that's just the way you like to do things. I think you've got different sorts of cases, biologically speaking.
Yeah, I agree. They are different, and we should delve into it. But, you know, one of the things, you know, at the moment, we only have 4 registered specialists in behavioural medicine in Australia. And up until well, 10 years ago, Jackie, my resident, became a specialist, and it's only in the last few years that we've had Gabrielle and Trifina come on board. And Gabrielle works at a shelter. So really there's only 3 of us who are specialists working in Australia, and there's no way known we could do it. We now have tons of residents and tons of interest in it, which is great. But, this is where those studies are going to come from, because it'll be the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. And I'm not talking, like I'm hoping they're coming around every 3 years rather than a generation in the way that you think of, because I'll never see it. But the more people we have that work in fields like, I'm quite pleased to be going back to teaching at Sydney Uni, because I used to teach there and then they decided they didn't need me. And when I see the students, they come through and, I ask them simple questions, even about cat social systems. They've got no idea. Medication, whoa, that's nothing that they get taught at all. And when I was talking to the student yesterday, I said, well, did they teach you about serotonin? No, didn't hear a thing. Well, how on earth do you get out the door and prescribe fluoxetine without understanding what serotonin does in the body? And she's finished now, this student, and she was particularly good. But it's kind of, how on earth are you going to graduate without having any of this? Because I know the world has changed. I mean, starting last millennium, we didn't have these expectations on these animals, and there was a social stigma about mental health in animals and people. That's much less so now. And clients expect you to know about these things, not just here's some, Prozac and away you go. You've got to be able to do more. But yeah, it would be interesting when there's more people and we can have somebody in a university like you are teaching, having PhD students, having other students from other fields, because I think vets need to be involved. I've always felt very strongly that vets need to be in charge, as you said, but it doesn't mean you can't work with good trainers and good assistants and people who want to do the hand-holding bit that I don't really want to be doing. It's just, I don't see myself as a trainer in any shape or form. And people go, well, why don't you train animals? I said, well, because I want to help them have the best life they can have. And just learning to sit isn't going to cut it for me. That's not what I want them to do. But interesting. I think the more that we populate the world with people with degrees and knowledge, and I don't know that degrees is always the right word there, but knowledge about what animals do and what they can and can't do, the better off the world will be.
I'm gonna enjoy listening to some of that tomorrow, because it seems as soon as I hand over to you, my internet decides to go down.
Or maybe you should do all the talking. That'd be fine.
That's not what this is about. This is me chatting to you. But yeah, so we've sort of circled back down actually to this whole issue of cultural issues. But where also do you see at the moment the big areas that we need to be exploring? Where do you think the big gaps in our knowledge are with regards to helping animals in this way?
Oh my goodness, that is a PhD all in itself. Look, I think the biggest, and having done this since last millennium, one of the things that for me, and probably frustration is the right word, is I've been talking about this literally till I'm blue in the face, not only in Australia, but internationally all over the world. And then I come, and wherever you go, you have to say the same thing over and over and again. And as I said to one of my residents the other day, you'd think after 20 years that you could have moved up the platform a little bit, and yes, we're getting into molecular biology. We're getting much more fancy dancy about what we do, but the baseline knowledge in the world is still virtually non-existent. And that's where I think, if I was, the biggest gap is, it's fabulous to work out these new medications and how they work and look at the receptor sites and do functional MRIs and do all that fancy dancy stuff. I'm really happy to see all that, and which eye muscles worked by the dogs can open their eye. That's fabulous, really good, the psychology. But the real basic stuff, when I hear people come in the door and telling me, yeah, my dog's really dominant with all the other dogs in the park, and oh yes, he's really submissive. I think, I don't know, I yes, there's dominant personalities, there's, you know, and I've given many lectures on, it's not a bad word, it's the context it's taken on in the lay public. So the biggest gap I see is really educating people. And the problem is once it gets out there and the media and social media get hold of things, some of this stuff gets it's just there in perpetuity. And I do, you know, like, I guess this is my frustration is you think, Jenny and I and Sarah and Kathy and, you know, name after name, been talking about this for 20 years and we're still beating the same, we're still dealing with the same problem. We're still dealing with the same problem.
That's because none of us do TikTok, I think. This is the problem. We need some young vets who do TikTok to get this out there to the people,
Yeah,
because that seems to be the way.
The only way.
But, yeah, but I remember somebody saying to me, and I don't remember who it was, and I think it was actually one of my non-vet friends, and said the problem with behavioral medicine is it became a specialism before it became mainstream. And you know, you know, we've been doing the 3-hour consultations and stuff like that, but there's an awful lot that can be done and needs to be done in the 10-minute GP clinic. And that's the day one skill that needs to be taught in the vet schools, and that people understand, because rightly or wrongly, I think the majority of people still do turn to their vet as the first source of information, or the authoritative source of information after Dr. Google, on, you know, the way that their animals should be managed. And I think, speaking to, you know, people in this country, the attitude has always been, well, you know, we don't teach that in the vet schools because you pick that up when you see practice. But the problem with that is you're being taught from people the ideas of 40, 50 years ago, and that's the whole culture, and things need to move on, and we need to understand. As I said, I think it's a completely different world when you live with your dog and your dog was with you everywhere and you could take your dog everywhere, then the dogs fit into those situations. And, you know, they just, you know, they had to fit in. And they were learning through constant reinforcement, whatever, what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate. Whereas now there's more distance, although the relationship is not much closer. People are much closer to their animals emotionally, I think, or maybe more emotionally vulnerable to disruption of the relationship. But yeah, the animal needs that much more guidance, and the owners need more guidance, rather than just sort of, well, the dog will work it out.
Yeah, I missed a lot of yours because you went into ether again. But I do agree with the bits I heard that it is, and some of it I don't know if we can actually make that statement in the sense of, how do we know how the Egyptians felt about cats? I mean, if you had to actually shave off your left eyebrow when your cat died, there's a closeness to the bond that I don't see us. We see the mourning, but it's a whole different background. So it'd be lovely to go back and have a look anthropologically how people, you know, and in, you know, that burial site in Malaha in Israel with the woman, and like with the arm around the puppy, there's, I don't know, I'm not sure the relationship. I think it's evolved, the relationship, but I agree that we as vets are not taught, or were not taught, the basics of what you do in your first 10-minute consult that you can actually recognise. But we did a study a few years ago, and there's a lot of stuff I've done studies on and not published. But in fact, vets are not where they go to first for help. You know, we specifically looked at thunderstorms, and less than 15% of people, even though they knew their dog was, you know, really affected by thunderstorms, would go to their vet for help. Less than 15% of people. They knew their dog had panic attacks. They knew their dog was suffering, but the vet was low on the list of places you go. So we kind of, I think, fool ourselves that we are the authoritative one, but the man up the road, the woman in the park, the person who sells them, well, we don't have so many small corner stores anymore. They're all in malls, but, you know, they get their information from others. And social media, I think, is real problematic. I mean, Dr. Google, as we know, can tell you good stuff and bad stuff. But social media, you have no control over who owns that Facebook page that tells you X, Y, and Z. And I always ask my clients, where did you go for help? Where did you go first? Where did you go second? What did they tell you? And usually they've been to everybody else, then they go to their vet, and then worst comes to last, they come to see me. And so that dog, as we were talking about before, has probably spent 2 or 3 years going from maybe a positive reinforcement trainer to a punishment trainer to boarding, where, you know, I'll have the dog for 2 weeks, I'll fix the problem for you, don't worry about that, you know, to, well, let's try, you know, like, let's try some natural supplements, I guess. Then finally the vet says, I think the dog needs medication. And they go, I don't want my dog on medication. And then finally they go, okay, now we're going to go and see someone. And that dog, you know, one of the questions I asked my question is, do you feel guilty about what's happened to your animal? And the number of times people go, yeah, I do. And it's interesting. Again, this is when I have time, I'll publish all of those things, because I think it is fascinating to find how long it takes people to get to you and why. And maybe that's why these animals are suffering that you and I see. And the people feel so bad about it, because suddenly they get help, they understand what's going on, they go, oh my goodness, you know, I let this happen, knowingly let this happen. And I said, but you haven't knowingly let it happen. You went and sought advice. You just unfortunately didn't get the best advice at that time. And but let me tell you a really good news story that I hope was a client I saw a little while ago, and her dog has issues and mental health issues, and we put the dog on medication. And she said, you know, and it's only early days yet, but she said, and then she told me a story, and I said, well, your dog having mental health issues is probably the best thing that ever happened to you, because her daughter they realised she had issues. And she said, when she came home and the dog was treated and on medication, she said, Mum, I need to talk to you. I think I need the same help that you've just given to the dog. And I said, well, isn't that wonderful that your dog has opened up that line of communication, that your teenager can come and say to you, I need help with this. And so that's my good news story of the week. And I think that is, you know, that warmed the cockles of my heart, that the dog was able to open up that line of communication with her parents and to say, I need help too. I'm not well.
Yeah.
So there you go. We do some good in the world in places we don't even think about.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Companion animals, they open up so much without being necessarily aware that they're doing it, and they can make things, so much better for us and help us in so many other ways. So I think that's a lovely point at which we should pause. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's been difficult with all the freezing, etc., of what has been going on. So I'm going to have to edit this one, or try and get it edited and stitched together so that it flows pretty well. But and I can see you frozen now yourself. So I'm going to say thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up in person before too long. So thanks a lot.
Perfect timing. And yes,
I'll see you soon.
See you later. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please remember to give us a like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. We all do these episodes for free because we hope people will take something useful from them. So giving us a like and subscribing helps others find us and related content. We have a lot more episodes for you to enjoy on our podcast platform, with videos on my YouTube channel together with other resources. Just search for What Makes You Click and Daniel Mills. Subscribing to both our Facebook group and YouTube channel not only helps in a similar way, but also means you shouldn't miss when the next episode comes out. Thanks once again, and feel free to post a comment or suggestion. Bye now.